Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Owen Foster, co-founder of Aether Global Learning and Shift Design. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Owen Foster, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Yeah, thank you, and glad to be here.
So, Owen, you've worked on so many different projects, small consumer products to immersive outdoor experiences all around the world. Where does this whole passion of all things design, if you will, come from?
Okay, so I'll try to condense, 50 years of storytelling into a quick little conversation, you could say. I grew up on a farm. My dad was, we did about 2,000 acres of row cropping in Alabama. And of course, as a young child, you're looking at how do you get out of things, right? So it was a constant, my creative juices were like, man, I don't want to work today. How can I get out of it? But then it started becoming problem solving. And then I started looking at, well, how can I make the world better around me? How can I make the people, and this is all the stages, throughout life. And it was innate. I don't know why, but what drives me is the creation of things, figuring out things. I love looking and watching and observing people, how they do different tasks. And then I start going, well, why do they do it this way? Why do they do it that way? And so I think growing up in that kind of environment where you had to figure things out for yourself, you're constantly occupying yourself with different things, has made me curious about the world. And for me, design has been that outlet of those creative juices. And it allows me to be curious of the world around me and everything that's in it and everyone. And it gives me something that I think I can give back to the world. So I think that's where most all things that you said, design is basically just curiosity.
Well, I'm sure as a young child on 2,000 acres, there was a lot to be curious about.
You have no idea.
So what's your first step off the farm? Like, what was your first move away? Was it in college or university, or some other things that drew you off?
So the way I like telling, because I've been a professor at higher ed, but the way I chose a college, I use what we used to call a compass, right? You put it on let's see, a GPS 0.01, which was a physical map. And I drew a circle. And I said, I have to get away far enough that my parents can still see me, but not drop in on me. And so I went off to college not knowing a single person, not knowing anyone in the region. I went to Florida State out of high school. Probably some of the greatest advices my father ever has given me was the day I went to college. He said, son, I'm sending you here for two things, social growth and academic growth. He said, if you do all books and no social, you're missing out what college is all about. But if you do all social, no books, you're missing out what college is for. He said, the academics is setting you up for your first, second, and third career. The social is setting the foundations of who you will be in your 30s and 40s. He said, I'm sending you to a place away from home, completely different than what you're used to. I graduated 70, largest class ever in my high school. The whole town was 800 to a major, university. He goes, but I want you to grow to be the young man that I know you can be. And so that was the first venture off you could say off like the family land, pretty much. It allowed me to have confidence because my father and my mother wanted me to go away and see things. That way I could always bring it back home if I wanted to come back home.
Isn't that gold? I mean, that kind of support from your parents, that kind of understanding of the experience, it truly must have been gold and as a teenager.
Oh, it was outstanding because I started college at just turning 17 because I was young for my class. And to know that my parents trusted me that much to send me 8 hours away to and they knew it, but I didn't think they knew it, to a major party school. It's, and I tried to give the same kind of trust to even my students, because I have found if I trust that they can bring out brilliance, they'll surprise you every single time. And like, that's what I'm looking for. But if I try to shelter them and give them too many guardrails and scaffoldings and stuff, they don't have that chance to have these great epic victories or complete failures. But along that path, you grow both directions. So I was fortunate. And I thank my parents pretty much every time I see them for it, even today.
I do have to point out one thing though, Owen, in your story, when you talked about the compass. So you use geometry to get into a creative industry. There's a
Yeah.
lot of us, and I did not go into geometry. My master's was in finance. There's a lot of people listening today going, yeah, look at that. You need math to get into creative. Just wanted to point that out.
Hey, look, everything around us has math. It's just, how can you make the numbers dance in your head in a different way than everybody else?
There you go. So, okay, so Florida State. Now, you and I met. I mean, you were boy, it's a long time ago because we met through a colleague, Tom Gaddis. It was at
Mhm.
Savannah College of Art and Design. What was your path then? Because you talk a lot about students and guardrails. Talk about your path to teaching and some of the other, really critical things that you think are important to the world of learning today, especially in a truly frenetic environment.
So my first advice to everyone, you have no idea where your path is going to take you. I started at Florida State. My parents got a divorce 2 years into it. I came back in state to go to Auburn and finish there. My parents got remarried as soon as I got back in state, so I thought it was a plot. But I went into landscape design and architecture first. Right? I was doing that and I was learning foundations, but my father made me work construction because he said, you need to know the application of these things as you're going through architecture school and all those things. And at that point, I was too logical. I'm like, all of these things that the professor is trying to get me to design doesn't work, because it's kind of like looking at Zaha Hadid's brilliance from a very that can't be built kind of attitude. And I wasn't old
Right.
enough to understand some of the lessons. And so I went through that and I started building a foundation I didn't even know I had. Now, during my late high school through mid 20s, I coached little league sports. And the reason I'm mentioning this because it is very important later on in life. It's the greatest thing that I've ever done in my life, period. I mean, there's nothing that competes with it. And it's, if I could have got rid of the parents, it would have been the greatest thing ever. Parents kind of bring down, little league sports. But it was something about it. It was the love of the game. It was watching 9 and 12-year-olds like grow and have this spark of like brilliance through athletics or even finding themselves. And you would sit there and, have talks with them and things like that. And it was filling my lungs with something I couldn't identify. I didn't know about it. It's just, it felt right. So I kept on my journey. I went into industry. My brother and I started business, and then I ended up at Monrovia Nurseries, where I was the East Coast landscape rep for them. And I went to them. I said, look, I'm doing the macro kind of designs. I'm doing exhibits. I'm doing all these things. I want to do the micro as well. And they were like, okay, go back, get your, master's and then come back. Okay, cool. Perfect. So I went back to grad school at Auburn for industrial design, where I got my second undergrad in environmental design as well. And as I'm working through it, because I'm in my 30s, so I don't really need the social growth anymore, I started helping undergrads. And I would find myself helping undergrads until 4 in the morning. And then I would do my work from 4 to 8 to turn it in. But because I already had design background, it was kind of,
Right.
I knew most of the basics. And for some reason, as I'm helping them, I feel that lung filling up again. It's just like, I don't know what it was. And then all of a sudden, to me, it was self-worth, right? And I found it and I could identify it finally because I was mature enough to understand it. And so I helped, and Auburn, asked me to stay as a visiting professor for a few years. And then I went into industry. I did a bunch of things from products aspects. And then I was asked to come back into academia by University of Louisiana Lafayette. And it was just on a phone call. Mr. Jerry calls me up and we're talking, and he said, I heard you wanted to get back into education. Oh yeah, I'd love to one day, no problem. And so he calls me the next day and we're talking still more and more. He goes, well, that's great. I said, so when are y'all looking? He goes, oh, you're hired. Be here in 2 weeks. I'm like, what? He goes, yep. I said, do you want to see references, portfolio? He goes, no, no. I've talked to some of your old colleagues at Auburn. They highly recommend you, and we want you here. I was like, okay. And if you know me, you know that I am all about, hey, let's try it. I'm a very courageous, daring person to a fault sometimes. So I was like, okay. So I walked into my boss's office and look, here's my 2 weeks. He goes, why? I'm like, there's something that I have to find out for myself if that's where my calling is. So I went there. I helped build some of the program, and then I was poached by SCAD in Savannah. Went there, become chair. Tom was a chair, a couple of few people before me, and I become chair there. And then it just kept snowballing and snowballing. I went out with Tom and John McCabe to start Aether, global learning, all of those different things. We look at different ways to teach because I am very unscripted, especially when it comes to education. I am all about non-traditional types of methods of teaching because I think it takes the holistic approach of understanding how to learn to grow. And so that's kind of the path that I've taken, where I've done landscapes in the US, China, different places like that. I've done exhibits that were 160 by 160. I've done small little products. I've done drones for the military. I've even worked with the New York Yankees to develop youth sports equipment. So I've been lucky. Like I said, I'm not going to say I'm the most talented person. I just happen to have the courage to go talk to a wall if I need to. And so it's allowed me to build a network and work through life to where I'm at right now.
Well, and it was, as you tell the story, and it's something I didn't know. You talk a lot about business and being in business as well as design. So, I mean, today when people talk about integrating business and design, that's kind of, it's not old hat, but it's talked about. But a few decades ago, and we're not going to talk about our ages, but when you started integrating it and in your own life and in your own journey, that was quite new and different. How do you see business and design interplaying?
Well, I mean, one leads to the next and they play off of each other in my world, right? I'm not saying all business needs a designer sitting there, but designers also have to be able to understand business, or you're an artist, right? And business means a lot of different things. And what's beautiful about a designer's mindset coming into the business, you could say environment, is we tend to be really a glue type of curriculum, like a discipline, right? Because we have to learn how to translate what everybody's saying in different ways. We tend to be dot connectors, right? Because we have this, we have this, we have this. And because of how we think and how we run through life, you could say just by choices, sometimes it's easier that way. Now, the flaw to it is we love the shiny thing, right? Where business people are like, no, it's got to be numbers. We run a little bit more emotional than a lot of times just numbers. But to be able to do things, you have to play both sides. Now, I'm not an expert at business, right? I am not an expert at engineering, but I know enough to be able to sit down and have an educated conversation back and forth with people that are the professionals, that are the masters of it, and we can have that negotiation and understanding, and then we leave with appreciation and respect for each other. That is the key. If you constantly go, no, it needs this, and you can't tell them why, and you can't meet them where they're at sometimes as well, you're never going to build that respect. And then you're just beating yourself against the wall.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that to be a great team member, to form a great team today, it's about openness and curiosity, no matter
Yes.
what field or what problem we're looking at.
Right. No, curiosity to me is the core of anything and everything. I mean, okay, so people talk about the empathetic practice, right? We need to learn empathy. We need to run the empathy mapping and all this stuff throughout the process of trying to create things. For me, you can't get to empathy unless you have curiosity. If I'm not curious enough about the people in which I'm studying or the demographics in which I'm trying to reach, I will never have empathy, because empathy doesn't come because you did a chart. It's impossible to understand deep enough about people to have empathy. You're going to have sympathy, not empathy. But if I'm curious enough and I want to know it, and I really dive in there and really try to take myself and put myself in their shoes, that's where empathy starts to grow.
And you know, we hear a lot more about empathy today. It's not like it was just invented in the 2000s, but I think the reality is that bringing empathy and understanding for other people, whether it's at the table, purchasing from you, or coming up with things. I mean, today this generation has grown up communicating online, which we didn't have the opportunity to understand, to empathize, and to want to learn about other people in different parts of the world, different walks of life. And if you are not empathetic as a human being or a brand or a school, I think you just are not going to keep up.
Right. And again, okay, going back to the curiosity aspect of it, have you asked the 5 whys? Like, everybody can ask the one why. Well, why do they do it that way? Okay. Now you got that answer. Well, why? But why? But why? And I think that's where being connected to the world, in which, again, our connection was a dial-up phone to the neighboring town growing up, but being able to see things in different ways and seeing people from different continents at an instant. I love working with children to get them curious about other cultures, because there's not one way the world looks at even a single word, right? Okay, so example here is I work with WDO's Young Design Circle, where we've got 20 brilliant young designers or young professionals that are in the creative fields from all around the world on one like council. I think you've even interviewed one, Miss Abigail, way back.
Right.
I mean, she launches satellites and she just got into grad school. I mean, come on.
From a smartphone.
Correct.
In university.
Right. And it's just like, why am I here? Y'all have so much more to offer the world than I do. But we tackled a word called peace. And, you know, and everybody thinks, oh, I know what peace means. Do you? Is your culture, it's got one definition, or even your region, or even your town, or even your family, your household has a definition. But peace here doesn't mean the same as it does on another continent. Doesn't mean it's next door. And we started understanding that the empathetic approach is trying to be open to all definitions, to listen to the entire conversation, and then try to see it from all aspects. Like, take the 10,000 out and zoom into the like granular level. That's where you're starting to see the empathy. And I think the younger generation has more at their disposal, and they're more curious about it because that's all they've ever seen.
Well, and I think, you know, one of the things I talk to organizations a lot about it, you know, when they talk about next gen and communication skills, I always say that their skills are just different, but they are much better communicators
Mhm.
than we ever were because they're already fluent in so many languages, quote unquote, from the people they've spoken about, and taking the capacity to speak to people around the world any time of day on any subject and throwing them into a cubicle is just so dead wrong,
Mhm.
and so fundamental to the future of onboarding and getting people to move from college to the working world, if you will, easily.
Yeah. I mean, okay, think about sports, right? I grew up with it. And a coach has to have a game plan, right? They've
Right.
looked at everything, they understood their opponent, but you also have to know each individual player for who they are.
Hmm.
You expect certain things and you practice where they have a routine and all those things. But let's say we're all on a team. You're going to have certain things that amp you up or get you excited or brings you down. I have different markers. A coach has to be able to do that with every single person, but make them work as a unit. I love when you said by taking a person and sticking them in a cubicle doesn't mean that that's going to make them more efficient. It doesn't. Some people thrive in it, but some people don't. And so as we evolve, especially from a business aspect, you have to know who you have on your team, who you connect with, who you collaborate with. And it is your job, if you're the one that's in charge, to level everyone up to bring the whole company, the business, and the products or whatever it is up with them
Right. Right.
by looking at the whole system.
So Owen, you mentioned earlier Ether Global Learning.
Hmm?
What is Ether and how does it play into our discussion,
Okay,
and
so
what you've been describing?
Ether was it spun off of something else called Shift. And Shift was just a design camp in the middle of the wilderness of Alabama, where we brought young students, professionals from all over the world, put them where cell phones don't work. My backyard growing up, right? So, but Ether started. We started looking at how can we educate people in different ways. It is not to replace higher ed. It is not to replace anything. It is a complementary aspect. We like we looked at it from if you go into, let's say, a design school, they're going to tell you do this, 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 this. But then I turn around and ask those students, so how does the doorknob work? They're like, oh, you turn it, you twist it. No, 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 no. That's the function to make it work. How does it work? They're like, we don't know. I'm like, you've never been curious enough to take it apart to look at it? You touch it every single day. So we looked at it from how can we be that add-on, that place where people we push you to discover. We put you in situations. We look at a bigger scheme and we highlight and actually promote where you come from.
Hmm.
If you are from different universities, fly your banners because they're giving you a foundation. We want to show you the application of that foundation. And so we started looking at it and we've done different things around the world and stuff like that. But it was about how do you learn? How do you have that like untapped potential of being more than you were yesterday and tomorrow being more than you are today? And that was the whole scheme. Like, and the way we looked at it is we teach each other, we learn from each other, and then together we can make amazing, incredible things. So that's where the basis of Ether Global Learning is because we knew as three founders had 50, 60 years of education all together that though we were proud of what we taught in schools, we knew there was more to it and we wanted to add more to it. And we wanted to make sure, and for me personally, I'm going to speak for me personally of the group, is I want people and my students to reach heights that I could never reach by standing on my shoulders. And if I can give those platforms, then my self-worth and my lungs are full.
So as you say that, I mean, again, going back to your dad, I mean, he opened the door for you to be curious, for you to discover. I'm guessing that that is one of the fundamental tenets, in opening the door for others. What would another one be? Like if I were going to a shift camp or if I were engaging with Aether, how do I get onto your shoulders?
Because I offer them for one, right? But I
Okay.
put you in places, environments, and teams and stuff that you're not normally used to. Okay, so when you come to one of our camps, everybody's used to working on a computer, finding information through Google, all of those things. Well, it doesn't work where we are. Like, I live so far out in the middle of Alabama that you have to walk around like this for about an hour to find a bar, maybe on your cell phone. But once you put these people together, sometimes they've never met each other, and you give them the most outrageous task, then they don't know that they're learning to learn. And they start building this collaboration, they build this community, and you start building culture. That's when knowledge starts passing back and forth. And right, because data and experience is what creates knowledge. They're the greatest data collectors are because they have these things. But the experience part is what they're lacking because, like I said, no one's ever been interested enough to take the doorknob off. But if we can give them that experience, now their bubbles of knowledge are even more important. And to me, you need as many like dots of knowledge as you can get, because once you start learning how to connect those, that's where wisdom comes from. And that's how you let people grow to heights that you can never grow.
I like that. There's definitely, what I'm hearing is serendipity, openness, willingness, just so many incredible things. Now, Owen, I know you've taught and you've spoken in so many parts of the world. I think most recently you were in El Salvador.
What?
What brought you there, and what's it like when you're working with people in a different culture? Is design a common language? How do you engage so quickly?
So the lady that I was working with, I had met 8, 9 years before, and I'd been to El Salvador once when she was teaching at another school, and I worked with underclassmen. Well, we stayed in contact and things back and forth. And she said, "Would you come down and run some workshops for a couple of different universities and work with the undergrads and then our graduate program?" Sure. I'm open to travel and going places and experience and things because I need to do those things to be able to pass more along, right? I am not finished growing. My journey is not finished myself. So I think the more I expose myself to, the greater the lessons I can give to someone else. So I go down there. Now, I'm going to be straight up honest. I know very little Spanish, very little. I cannot speak it. I can understand a little bit of it, but that's about as far as it goes. So I always have an interpreter with me and stuff when I'm down there. It's usually a student. But the thing about it is, I'm there to show that design is a mindset, not a skill set. And so we do different things, and I show them different ways of approaching problems because most people say problems. I'm like, no, no, no. That means we're being reactive. Sometimes you have to
Right.
be reactive, but I want to show opportunities so we're proactive, so the
Mhm.
problems don't exist. And so going down there and seeing it different ways and working with students that have a certain foundation of what design is, and especially industrial design, because it's still a new thing in El Salvador. And you see the light bulb flicker, right? They're like, I don't know what he's saying. I don't understand. What does that mean? And oh, wait, I kind of get it now. And so we did exercises. We went into community. We looked at street vendors and everything. And then we went back and we prototyped. But the funny thing about that program was I sent the professors out at the end. I'm like, y'all got to get out of the room. And they're like, why? I'm like, that's part of my program. You've got to get out. And they were like, okay, well, Selena, which is a friend of mine that's a professor, she goes, y'all, we need to leave. He's he doesn't do things by the book. And they were like, okay. So they all went out to the teacher's lounge, hung out and stuff. And why I did that is because I wanted them to be surprised at the end. I don't wanted it still to be an unveiling to them. But then I got the students together and said, look, this is your chance to have your own voice. Don't play by the rules of a class. Don't play by what you think they want to know. You have the opportunity to tell your story the exact way you want to tell it. You're the creators of this. And so they're like, and you just sound like, man, we got freedom, right? And again, it goes back to that trust. I gave them the trust in which I know you can deliver something. Now show me, right? It's a slight challenge. Well, then the professors come back and we have some new professors come in to be judges and stuff. It was amazing that these students were acting out scenes. They were the grumpy old man on the corner. They were the cart. And one girl, they couldn't build the prototype in time, so she become the cart and she bent over and was holding things, and they were look like so. It was a performance that the professors had never seen the students open up and do. And it was just like, you get that proud moment, like the parent or the teacher, and you just like, and the professors looked around and said, we've never seen this much enjoyment. I'm like, because you never allowed them to enjoy the process. They're constantly trying to do it for the grade. There's no grade. This is pure learning. And they don't even know they're doing it.
Right.
And so we did that. And then I worked with the grad program where they were pitching ideas and I was showing them different things and stuff. But everyone around the world has potential, no matter if you know what design is, because it's a mindset. It's not a program on a computer. It's not that I can sketch really well. Those are just communication skills. Those are tools for communication. If you can think and look at problems and opportunities differently, if you can have a creative mindset where you're looking at tackling things in different ways, you're reframing, you're repurposing, you're being responsible, and you're looking at it as a holistic piece, then you can call yourself a designer to a degree. Let's not get all because you think certain way doesn't mean you're a designer,
A
but
quasi designer, we'll go that
correct.
far.
You have the mindset.
What I'm hearing though is a lot of energy, and the energy that we build from one another. And nowhere near what you or Tom have done, but I teach now. Sometimes it's in person, sometimes hybrid, sometimes high flex. You just can't, in my mind, you cannot achieve the energy and serendipity via computer. And we are human beings. So I don't know where you sit on that, but I always push for some in person, even if it's look, some learning is yes, you need to learn these 10 steps today, or else, I mean, that's normal. If you want to
Right.
build a bridge, you got to know where to put the steel. I get it.
Mhm.
But if some of it isn't in person, and feeding off and generating the energy, I feel a little bit lost.
It's hard for me. I mean, I'm not sure if you can tell or not across the screen. I am high energy and high enthusiasm at all times. It's just the way I'm wired. I can't help it. But I've had to learn to adapt and adopt technology. And the thing about it is, generations from now that are coming up, it's native to them. I'm the one getting phased out if I don't start looking at it differently.
Right.
But I still get pure energy, and I think you need the human interaction. But the way I'm getting around it is I'm making it personal. I'm
Mm-hmm.
making that they pull something to the screen. I make them sketch why we're doing it. And so it becomes as close to being in front of them as I can get. I don't like people phasing out or glassing over or not looking at the screen or, I've even had students that do this. I'm like, what the heck is that? But I think if you can bring it in and make it to where they feel part of the conversation at all times, and I'll have, again, most of the time I have sticky notes back here. I'll sketch things and make them fill it in and they have to put it up and stuff. I'm having to learn new tools to be able to connect to the next generations. I mean, think about our jokes. I used to make jokes of 8-tracks. People don't even know what an 8-track is now, so that's irrelevant. And so I had one professor once, a couple of years ago. I was on a council, which I get put on councils for about 2 or 3 visits, and then they kick me off the councils because I ask hard questions. So I was part of general education for a university. I will not mention it. And the first question I had, so what's education to you? And they're like, what do you mean? It's class. I'm like, no, 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 no. Education doesn't mean a classroom. And so, I started doing what I do. I break it down. I ask a lot of questions. I go from different angles. And one lady said, my students just want to be TikTok famous. Okay. Are you teaching on TikTok? She goes, no, why? I'm like, then you're phased out. You're old.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, I'm like, no, 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 no. If you're not using the tools in which connects to those students in some form or fashion, then you're obsolete. And so I'm like, you have to look at different ways to connect to people. Now, I'm not saying get rid of the old traditional ways, because I am still traditional. And I think the studio space is still traditional. And I think by building things and breaking things and putting things in Frankenstein, like you said, it sparks your brain in so many different ways. And then seeing 20 other people do the same thing, it's beautiful chaos. But we know that it's going to have to be a hybrids. And so how are we building that? And that's a hurdle every day for me, but I'm up for the challenge.
I love that beautiful chaos. And it's a nice place as we come close to the end of our time today, Owen. I've got another few questions that are maybe around design thinking specifically. And when you talk about design and design thinking, what you've described is curiosity and discovery. But there's that old saying, ignorance is bliss. So if ignorance is bliss, isn't this design thing just annoying?
Yes, it is. But you want to go looking at the world and tackling these opportunities I'm talking about as a 5-year-old, being naive, not ignorant, naive. Because naive means you don't have biases and assumptions coming into it that jade your decisions. And a 5-year-old, when it comes to creativity, is some of the bravest souls on this planet. Why are we not doing that as adults? Why do we put so many filters on as we go through this and going, no, that can't work, that can't work. No, make sense of it. Like, I've had little kids work with my adult classes and stuff where they do. Oh, and that even happened in El Salvador, where they were working on different things about education. And I said, I've got experts coming in to work with you. I brought in 4 to 7-year-olds and said with them, like, these are your project leads. You have to create by their guidance.
Mm-hmm.
And when they talk about black magic, pixie dust, dragons, and all of those things, how are you interpreting what the actions are, not what the words tell you they are? And that's where I think being naive and curious sparks everything.
I love that. I really appreciate that. And one last question, and it's in some ways, and this may be a layperson's interpretation, design thinking is the social anthropology of consumerism. I mean, this human centric looking at things, it's to make people buy more, do what we want. And can it be as dangerous as we're seeing social media become when it's not well managed?
Yes. And okay, so I know the world looks at design thinking as this process in which we should be using all the time. I understand it. I understand why it's an industry term. I don't like it. And I'm going to tell you why. I think the process is needed, but from a different angle. Anybody that says design thinking, they think step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, or 10, depending on which process you're using. And they think it's very linear. If I do this, it leads me to this, it leads me to this. No, think about stepping stones across a creek, right? You got 1 stone, 2 stone, and they think that's the design process. It is not. And that's why I use thinking by design or thinking with design instead of design thinking. It's the water. It's the water which is the fluid methodology. It takes you forward, it takes you backwards, it takes you side to side, and you will swirl a lot because you're trying to discover something that might be obvious, but it's not attainable right there because you're looking at it from different. You use the stones to take a breath and analyze, and then you jump back in the water. And I think if people use it in that terms and use it as a mindset, not a process to, again, create more artifacts, to do these things and push people to think this way. No, let people use the toolkits in which the methodology can teach to create their own methodologies in their brain and how they tackle the world around them. That's where the success of it is, not by just creating more products or services or things like that. That's not my end goal. Now, again, I do it, for products and stuff too. Don't get me wrong. I'm still a designer, but the end goal is to use it for thinking, not just to create something.
Well, thank you for that, Owen. It's been a real pleasure, and hope to have you back on Say Hi to the Future. And again, on one of our stages. You were wonderful in Columbus, and I'm sure you will continue to be a great member of our community. So thank you again.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.